I sat frozen, unable to comprehend what I was hearing as Laura, my wife of 25 years, calmly explained why she was handing me divorce papers. Her voice was steady and detached, like she'd rehearsed this moment 100 times. When she noticed my blank stare, she snapped, "Are you even listening, David?" I shook myself out of my daze. "Sorry, I zoned out." She sighed and started over, her tone sharp and businesslike. "You'll keep the house, the cars, and everything in the bank. It's all yours. Just sign the papers, and in 3 months, it'll be finalized." She pushed the documents toward me, as if that would make this all easier. I couldn't say a word. My thoughts raced through the life we'd built together. We'd been inseparable since high school, raising our twin daughters Emily and Olivia, now thriving at Columbia University. We lived in a cozy suburban home, drove matching Volvos, and Laura had her own credit cards and phone. I'd never denied her anything, never cheated, never treated her poorly. She never seemed unhappy, so why now? Maybe I'd missed something, some cry for attention I failed to hear. That thought gnawed at me, but I had to know. "Laura," I began, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I understand you want a divorce. But why? I just want to understand." Her expression tightened as she sank into a chair at the kitchen table. "David, don't do this. Just sign the papers." "No," I said, refusing to back down. "What did I do wrong? I deserve to know." She sighed heavily, her shoulders slumping. "You didn't do anything wrong. You were perfect. Too perfect, actually. Sometimes I even wished you'd screw up, just to give me a reason to leave, but you didn't. You're a great dad. You gave me everything I wanted, and my parents adore you. It's not you, it's me." Her words felt rehearsed, hollow. At 45, Laura was still stunning. Her light brown hair gleamed in the sunlight streaming through the window, and her flawless skin and toned figure reflected years of effort. Even now, in casual clothes, she radiated a poised confidence I'd always admired. And yet, here she was, throwing away everything we'd built together. "This doesn't make sense," I said, frustration rising. "There has to be more. You can't just leave it at that." She avoided my eyes, her voice soft but firm. "David, I'm trying to spare your feelings. Let's just leave it there." I refused to let her off the hook. "No, Laura. Tell me the truth." Her shoulders sagged further as she exhaled deeply. "Fine. I met someone else." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. "Who?" I managed. "His name is Ethan Cooper. He's a real estate developer. He has a luxury apartment overlooking the river and drives a sleek black Mercedes. He's attractive, successful, and crazy about me." I stared at her, disbelief mixing with anger and pain. "What about me, Laura? Does all that mean I wasn't enough?" "You've always been, and still are, a grocery store clerk," she said bluntly. "And that's fine. You've always provided for us, made us comfortable. But that's all you'll ever be. I wanted more." Her words stung more than I'd expected. I'd worked my way up to managing the grocery department and turned down promotions that would have uprooted our family. I sacrificed my own ambitions for stability, for our life together. And now, none of it mattered. "How long have you been seeing him?" I asked. 6 months, she admitted. "And have you slept with him?" Her back straightened, and her eyes locked onto mine. "Yes, David. While we were still married. I cheated on you. There. Are you happy now?" For a moment, I couldn't move. The weight of her confession left me breathless. Finally, I reached for the papers, signed where she'd indicated, and slid them back across the table. "I think he's better suited for you." "Sorry I wasn't enough," I said, standing to leave. As I walked away, she called after me, her voice tinged with something almost like regret. "David, wait. He's not better than you, just different. Don't you dare think this is your fault." But I was already out the door. Looking back, it was obvious I'd missed the signs. Laura had been quietly moving her things out for weeks, maybe months. By the time she handed me the papers, her closet was nearly empty. She left behind our wedding photos and family albums, as if to mock me with the memories of what we once were. That night, I numbed myself with beer, knowing there was no going back, and realizing I didn't want to. The next morning, I called my boss and requested 3 months of overdue vacation. They'd been urging me to take time off anyway, and now I had a reason. I called Emily and Olivia, explaining, "Your mom and I are separating, but we're doing okay." When they asked for her number, I admitted I didn't have it. Determined to take control of what little was left, I disconnected the landline, changed my cell number, and canceled the phone plan Laura had been using. I contacted a Volvo dealer about selling her car and reached out to my high school buddy Ryan, now a real estate agent, to sell the house quickly. I canceled credit cards, opened new bank accounts, and cashed out my life insurance policies. I wanted no loose ends. Over the next few days, I cleared the house of her belongings. Everything she left behind fit into 3 trash bags. I boxed up Emily and Olivia's things and stored them in the closet. Sorting through the family photos took hours, but I saved all the ones of the girls to give them later. All of Laura's pictures went straight into the trash. It might have been petty, but I didn't care. Getting rid of her face in my house felt like the first step to reclaiming some sense of control. Still, my biggest problem was that I had no clear direction. With 3 months of freedom ahead of me, I had no idea what to do next. Would I stay here or leave? Keep working or try something new? I had a few hobbies to distract me, though none seemed like they could become a full-time pursuit. I loved collecting coins, especially Indian head pennies, which I bought and sold on eBay. It was fun and gave me something to do, but it wasn't exactly a career. My other passion was geocaching, which got me outside and moving. Laura had always hated it. Ticks, poison ivy, and walking weren't her idea of a good time, but I enjoyed the thrill of the hunt. Still, I couldn't see how either of these interests could become something meaningful. When I wasn't geocaching or tinkering with coins, I spent time reading the Wall Street Journal. Emily and Olivia gifted me a subscription every Christmas, and while I didn't care much for stocks, I absorbed everything about farm commodities. I probably knew more about sugar, wheat, and corn than most market analysts. It was just a hobby, though. I didn't have any investments or plans to trade. Lately, I'd been doing a different kind of research, digging into Keystone Development and Ethan Cooper. Ryan, my old high school buddy and now a real estate agent, had some banking connections and promised to get me more details. I was eager to see what he found. Weeks passed with no word from Laura. Emily and Olivia called regularly to check in, offering their support, but I could tell they were torn. They loved me, but Laura was still their mother. I kept busy by holding a few yard sales to clear out the house. I sold most of the clutter, leaving just enough furniture to keep the place staged for potential buyers. One Sunday morning, while scanning the paper, I saw the photo of Laura and Ethan in the society section. They were at a political rally, mingling with local dignitaries. Seeing her so carefree stung, but it also solidified my resolve to move forward. A couple of weeks later, Ryan called with a lowball offer on the house, far below its appraised value, but with a quick 60-day closing. It wasn't ideal, but I accepted. He also wanted to meet for lunch, saying he had some interesting info about Ethan. Figuring I needed a break from the house, I agreed. Before lunch, I decided to spend the morning geocaching on Hayes Mountain. Although I'd already found all the geocaches there, I had another goal, locating 3 old survey markers. These markers, metal rods set in concrete, were scattered around the country to help surveyors and real estate professionals define property lines. For hardcore geocachers, finding these was like a bonus quest. Equipped with my GPS and metal detector, I drove to the mountain. Hayes Mountain, nearly 2,000 acres of preserved land, was managed by the Madison Land Trust, which relied on donations to protect it from urban sprawl. Near the parking lot, an orchard and farmhouse caught my eye. A large "For Sale" sign stood at the edge of the property. Curious, I wandered to the orchard fence, feeling a pang of sadness at the thought of it being bulldozed. Thinking about buying it or just enjoying the view? A voice asked from behind me. I turned to see an older man in overalls and a Peter Deere cap. I chuckled. If I had $1 million, I'd snatch it up in a heartbeat. He grinned. You'd be doing me a favor. The land trust wants it, but they're short on cash. Developers want to tear it all down. Why not wait for the trust? I asked. They're trying, but I can't hold out much longer. I'm already offering it for $600,000, even though it's listed at $1 million. The developers are pestering me every week. He shook his head. If they can't buy it, that real estate guy gets his hands on it. Ethan Cooper? I guessed. Yeah, that's him, the man grumbled. He's got an option to buy it for $1 million, but only if he secures all 6 properties in the area. If he doesn't get this one, the whole deal falls apart. What happens if you don't sell him the option? I asked. He chuckled. Let's just say he'll be in serious trouble. He's already sunk a fortune into this project, and if it fails, his backers will pull out. I'd help if I could, I said, genuinely sympathetic. Appreciate it, he replied, though he sounded resigned. With a nod, he headed back to the farmhouse, and I turned toward the trail. His mention of Keystone piqued my interest. I made a mental note to follow up with Ryan about it later. The survey markers were scattered about a mile apart as the crow flies, but the mountain's terrain made the trek feel much longer. The first 2 were easy to find, standard metal rods embedded in concrete. The third marker, however, was more elusive. It was older, buried under years of forest debris. After nearly an hour of searching, I finally uncovered it. But this wasn't just another rod in the ground. What I found was a small brick monument with a bronze plaque, hidden beneath layers of dirt and leaves. Intrigued, I snapped a picture, thinking it might be worth submitting to a geocaching magazine. As I moved away from the survey marker, my metal detector emitted a faint beep. Curious, I slipped on my headphones and scanned the area more thoroughly. After some careful digging, I unearthed a small iron box wrapped in oil-soaked canvas. The box was rusty but solid, with a heavy bronze lock that seemed almost impenetrable. Technically, finds like this on public land are supposed to be handed over to the authorities. But something about this box felt personal, like it had been waiting for me. Ignoring protocol, I tucked it into my bag and headed home. The whole drive back, my imagination ran wild. What could be inside? Gold coins? Civil War documents? The possibilities were endless. At home, I cleared the kitchen table and set the box down. After inspecting it carefully, I realized there was no way to open it without breaking the lock. Reluctantly, I grabbed my bolt cutters and snapped it open. Inside, wrapped in another layer of oiled canvas, were a dozen coins. But these weren't ordinary coins. They were large cents, dating as far back as 1793. Their condition was astonishing, with no trace of corrosion, and I instantly knew they were valuable. While I usually collected Indian head pennies, these coins reminded me of a book my grandfather had left me, The Quirks of the Penny. I'd always found it dull since I didn't own any of the coins it described, but that night, it became my guide. I stayed up until dawn with a magnifying glass and scanner, meticulously examining and cataloging each coin. The more I learned, the more excited I became. By noon, I was exhausted but exhilarated. I called work to check in, only to hear that Mark Johnson, one of the executives, had inquired about me. It felt odd, but I didn't dwell on it. Instead, I focused on my next task, securing a safe deposit box for the coins. My online research revealed that their combined value was in the millions thanks to their age, condition, and unique stamp varieties. The realization was staggering. Converting them to cash, however, wouldn't be simple. Over breakfast at IHOP, my thoughts were interrupted by another photo of Laura and Ethan in the newspaper. They were attending an art gallery opening, smiling as if they hadn't a care in the world. The sight fueled my determination. I called Peter Logan, the orchard owner I'd met on Hayes Mountain, and asked him to delay any decisions about selling his land. Then I visited the land trust to discuss a possible donation, which they eagerly welcomed. With only 4 weeks left before the divorce was final, I felt an urgent need to act. The rest of the day was spent researching reputable coin dealers and auction houses. After some deliberation, I settled on Hayes and Burns in New York City, known for handling high-value and discreet transactions. I arranged an appointment for Monday afternoon and scheduled lunch with Emily and Olivia beforehand. When I arrived at Hayes and Burns, I was impressed by their modern, high-tech showroom. After introducing myself, I was escorted to a more private office, where Robert Hayes greeted me warmly. Though he looked older than in his advertisements, his reputation preceded him. "Welcome to New York, Mr. Thompson. I hear you have some intriguing coins for us to see. Is this your first time in the city?" "Not quite," I replied. "My daughters attend Columbia, so I've been here before. But this is my first business trip," I added, I understand your expertise in coins, but do you have someone on staff who specializes in early copper coins? It might be helpful. He nodded and pressed the intercom. Murray, have Grayson join us in my office. Within minutes, Edward Grayson, renowned for his guides on large and half cents, entered the room. Like Robert, he looked older than his photos, but he exuded the confidence of someone who knew his craft. I have 12 coins, I began, but today, I'm offering 4 for sale. I'll keep the rest for now, depending on how things go. I believe 6 of them may qualify for conditional census status, but I'd like Mr. Grayson to confirm. Robert leaned forward. Where did these coins come from? They were handed down to me by my grandfather, I said, keeping my tone steady. It wasn't entirely true, but it was a plausible explanation. Robert arched an eyebrow. No offense, Mr. Thompson, but that's quite a claim. Can we see what you've brought? I placed 4 high-resolution photos on the table, each showing both sides of a coin, enlarged 5 times their actual size. The images captured every detail, from the faint imperfections to the pristine condition of the copper. Robert and Edward studied them closely, exchanging nods as they scrutinized each one. After a few minutes, Robert finally spoke. What's your asking price for these 4? A quick glance at recent auctions suggests these 4 coins could fetch about $1.3 million, I said. Morris, clearly impressed, nodded. I initially thought closer to $1 million, but your figure isn't far off, he admitted. Robert smiled. Morris knows his pennies, he said, then turned back to me. I'm prepared to offer $800,000 for the lot, but there's one condition. What sort of condition? I asked. I have a special letter from the land trust about donating land, I replied, sliding the letter and an advertisement for Peter Logan's orchard across the table. I'd like you to purchase this property and donate it to the Madison Land Trust. It's priced at $600,000. You'd earn a hefty tax deduction and some good karma points. Robert exchanged a glance with Morris. Give us a moment, he said. They moved to the far side of the room, whispering intently. After a few minutes, Morris stepped out and Robert returned. Do you have any of the coins with you? He asked. Yes, I said, pulling out a 5th coin. I'd like to keep this one in the mix. Moments later, Morris returned with a purple Crown Royal bag. We're willing to honor your terms on the land deal if you'll do the same on the coin deal, he said, appending the bag's contents onto the table. Out spilled nearly 100 coins, mostly gold, with a few silver pieces mixed in. This collection has a retail value of around $300,000, Robert explained. We've had trouble moving them, but you shouldn't have any issues. You've sold coins on eBay, right? I nodded. Your grandfather's coins should fly off the shelves, he said with a wink. After some thought, I agreed. We shook hands, and I handed over the 4 pennies. Now, Robert said, his eyes twinkling, tell us about this 5th coin. I held up a photo of the 1793 strawberry penny. It's the best I've ever seen. I'd rate it an 8, though I'm no expert, I said. Both Robert and Morris leaned in, studying the photo with wide eyes. Morris grinned, and Robert's excitement was unmistakable. How much? Robert asked. Best offer, I replied, as long as you can figure out how to pay me. Just then, a striking woman entered the room. Would you like some coffee, Mr. Thompson? She asked. Sure. Black's fine, I replied. She left, and Robert excused himself shortly after. When Robert returned with the woman, Victoria Langley, she introduced herself and asked if I had a passport. I confirmed that I did. Good, she said. We're heading to JFK to set up an offshore bank account. She gestured toward the strawberry penny. Do you have it with you? I handed it over, watching as Robert examined it with reverence. Though we didn't settle on a price, he assured me he'd hold onto my smaller collection until my return. Moments later, Victoria and I were boarding a plane to the Cayman Islands. The first-class flight was a whirlwind. Victoria was a magnet for attention, with photographers clamoring to capture her image. She seemed both amused and irritated by the spectacle, while I remained clueless about her celebrity status. When we landed, a bright yellow mini SUV awaited us. Victoria slid into the driver's seat with ease, her confidence and charm as striking as her appearance. I couldn't help but steal a few glances, which she noticed, clearly amused by my discomfort. 20 minutes later, we arrived at a mid-sized condo building. Victoria owned the entire property but lived on the top floor, a penthouse overlooking the ocean. "Care for anything, Mr. Thompson?" she asked as she left the room. Watching her leave was as captivating as seeing her at the terminal earlier. The view from the balcony was breathtaking, though the wind was a bit much for my liking. Victoria seemed to enjoy the effect, probably hoping to impress me with the luxury. But my mind was preoccupied with the bank account. "You're not much of a talker, Mr. Thompson," she teased. "Don't you have any questions?" "It's curious that someone like you drinks beer from a bottle," I replied. "I'd expect champagne or martinis instead." She laughed. "Sometimes it's best to keep it simple." "Well, I suppose you could tell me why we had to come all the way here to open a bank account," I said. "It's secure and discreet. You've got 7 more coins to manage, after all." "That still seems like overkill," I admitted. Smiling, she led us back inside. "Can you handle all of this, Mr. Thompson?" she asked suddenly, catching me off guard. "I brought you here so I could be myself for a few days." Her unexpected candor made me laugh. "If I were a decade younger, I'd say yes," I joked. "Teasing an old man isn't fair," she quipped, and we both chuckled. "Come on," she said. "Let's grab some fresh lobsters for dinner." We finished our beers and headed out, the evening unfolding in a way I hadn't expected. The restaurant was incredible, but the wine selected by the hostess didn't sit well with me. I tried to mask my discomfort, but it must have been obvious. "What's wrong with the wine, Mr. Thompson?" Victoria asked, her tone light but curious. "I'm sorry, it's just a reflex. When I was 18, I got sick on cheap white wine, and ever since, the smell or taste of it makes me nauseous," I admitted. "But don't worry, I'm sure it's a fine wine." Moments later, the server brought us 2 fresh long-neck beers. The meal continued with little conversation, but afterward, we shared slices of key lime pie and sipped coffee. That's when Victoria leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with curiosity. "So, tell me about yourself. Married? Kids? What do you do for a living? We've got all night, and I'd like to know how you ended up here." I chuckled at her barrage of questions. "That's quite a list." "Well, I have 2 daughters, both studying international banking, or something like it, at Columbia University. Honestly, I'm not entirely sure what their majors are. I just pay the tuition." "That's interesting," she said with a smile. "I have a master's degree from Columbia and occasionally lecture there. I might have even met your daughters." "They were with me for lunch earlier today," I said. "They're not thrilled when I make them skip class, but they humor me." "You must have married young if you have 2 daughters in college," she observed. "Yeah, it sounds like a movie cliché," I joked, feeling more at ease with her. Victoria's warmth and poise made conversation flow effortlessly. "As for me, I'm currently separated. My wife left me for some wealthy wheeler-dealer, probably a shopping mall tycoon or something, judging by his flashy car and penthouse. She says she's moving on, and the divorce will be final in about 4 weeks." "That's a flimsy reason to end a marriage," Victoria said sympathetically. "Yeah, I thought things were fine. Turns out, she wasn't happy with my career. I've had chances to move up, but she didn't want to relocate, so I stayed put. Now I feel like I sacrificed for nothing," I admitted, the bitterness creeping into my voice. "What about you?" I asked, redirecting the conversation. "What's your story?" There was a brief silence before she answered. "How do you tell a wealthy, beautiful woman that you manage a grocery store?" I said, half joking. She must have sensed my hesitation. "It's not a big deal. We can talk about it later," she offered gently. "No, it's fine," I said. "I'm not ashamed of what I do. I manage a supermarket, and I'm good at it. My daughters don't mind, but my wife always found ways to avoid mentioning it to people. I could tell it bothered her." "Do you enjoy your work?" Victoria asked as the server brought fresh coffee. "Yeah, I do. I'm pretty good at it, too," I said with a small smile. She studied me for a moment. "Mr. Thompson, I know we've just met, but first impressions matter. What's your initial impression of me?" The question caught me off guard. If I was too honest, I might scare her off, but flattery felt like a trap. Finally, I said, "In summary, you're beautiful, intelligent, educated, and confident." Her slight smirk and raised brows suggested she wasn't fully convinced. I was hoping for honesty, she said softly. I'm sorry. We're having such a pleasant evening. I didn't want to spoil it. Do you have such a low opinion of me? She asked, her tone suddenly serious. Maybe that's why your wife left. If you hadn't spent so much time trying to please her, your marriage might have been stronger. Her words stung, but I couldn't deny the truth in them. And you? I countered. You're used to getting what you want with charm and beauty. You play with men but avoid commitment. Yet, you're sharp with finances and seem to know how to invest wisely. If you weren't so determined to compete with everyone, you might make a great mother someday. Her expression softened, and for a moment, we simply looked at each other. Do you really think I'd make a good mother? She asked quietly. I nodded, feeling a little guilty for my earlier tone. On the drive back to the condo, the tension eased and the mood lightened. The night ended uneventfully, separate bedrooms, which suited me fine since I wasn't expecting anything more. The next morning, I woke to find breakfast ready and a copy of the Wall Street Journal waiting for me. The condo was quiet, and I enjoyed my coffee on the balcony, now free of the previous day's strong winds. About 20 minutes later, Victoria joined me, playfully snatching a section of the newspaper. We read in companionable silence, as if this were a routine we'd been following for years. The easy atmosphere made me comfortable enough to mention my daughters. My phone doesn't work here, and I'd like to call them, I said. Victoria handed me her phone. Go ahead. It's yours to use. Grateful, I called Emily. Where are you? Is everything okay? I asked, my voice anxious. I'm fine, Dad, Emily replied. I'm in the Cayman Islands, staying with a friend. I had to borrow her phone because mine's acting up. Her words took me by surprise, but before I could respond, Victoria's knowing smile told me there was more to this story. I pressed Emily for more details, mentioning I'd seen her on TV boarding a plane with Victoria Langley. What's going on? I asked, unable to hide my concern. Emily sounded defensive. Victoria's the friend I mentioned. Why does it matter? I hesitated before replying, trying to choose my words carefully. Victoria has a reputation, Emily. She's brilliant but ruthless. Just be cautious. As I spoke, Victoria walked by with a breakfast tray, her movements as graceful as ever. Introducing her to Emily, I mentioned my daughter was in New York. At the sound of Victoria's name, Emily groaned loudly enough for Victoria to hear. I caught snippets of her and Olivia whispering urgently on the other end. Why are you there? How do you know her? Are you coming home? Emily shot off her questions, her tone a mix of frustration and curiosity. Before I could respond, Victoria took the phone with her usual confidence. Hi, Emily. It's Victoria. Your dad's told me all about you and your sister. I'll be in New York tomorrow and would love to meet you both for lunch. Where should I pick you up? Whatever Emily said in reply was lost to me, but Victoria ended the call with a breezy, "Talk soon, Emily. Bye." Handing the phone back, she grinned. Looks like we're having lunch tomorrow. Don't worry. I'll be on my best behavior, even if they think I'm a shark. Later that morning, we visited the Federal Reserve Bank of the Cayman Islands. With Victoria's guidance, I opened my first offshore bank account. Within minutes, I saw a $4 million deposit from Hayes and Burns. The amount, earned from selling 215 pennies, felt surreal. Victoria seemed unfazed, casually arranging for us to feed manta rays afterward. Over dinner that evening, I asked about her work at Hayes and Burns. You're a partner, right? Not quite, she replied, smirking. I own 60% of the company. That revelation took me by surprise. That's impressive, I said, but I feel like I barely know you. What else should I know? She hesitated before sharing. I was born and raised in London. My dad's Syrian, my mom's Turkish. I earned my MBA at Columbia University, and I lecture there occasionally. Her tone grew softer. I've been engaged twice, but I haven't had a serious relationship in years. I've learned not to trust men. They always seem to have ulterior motives. That's unfortunate, I said, genuinely sympathetic. Her playfulness returned. Does that mean you don't trust me either, Mr. Thompson? I laughed. Should I? Or am I just another fool falling into your trap? You'll have to decide, she replied, her smirk leaving me unsure whether she was teasing or serious. That evening, Victoria brought me to a high-profile cocktail party at a luxury hotel. She was the center of attention, navigating the crowd with poise while I stayed in the background. Occasionally, she'd check on me, but I encouraged her to enjoy herself. I ended up in conversation with two Argentine cattle ranchers, talking soccer and fishing. Eventually, the discussion turned to investments, and one of them, Diego York, began enthusiastically describing his interest in winter wheat. His excitement was infectious, but his lack of knowledge left me puzzled. "Mr. Thompson, you don't look sold on winter wheat," Diego said, catching my expression. I chuckled nervously. "I'm not much of an investor. This is out of my depth." "But surely you have thoughts," he pressed. Feeling cornered, I deflected. "I think I need another drink." For the next hour, I listened as an Alabama greengrocer joined the conversation, explaining the dynamics of winter wheat crops in Canada compared to poor U.S. harvests. Though fascinating, I struggled to keep up. Just as I was running out of polite responses, Victoria appeared and pulled me away. "What was that about, David?" she asked, amused. "You looked like you were deep in grocery talk." I laughed, grateful for the rescue. I was completely out of my element. "Thanks for saving me." The next morning, we flew back to New York. Victoria's arrival caused a frenzy, with photographers swarming her at the airport. She handled the attention with ease, alternating between irritation and amusement. As we moved through the terminal, a courier from Hayes and Burns handed me a package containing the coins I'd left behind. Victoria and I said our goodbyes. "Take care of yourself, Mr. Thompson," she said warmly before disappearing into the crowd. Clutching the package, I made my way to the commuter train terminal, reflecting on everything that had happened. The whirlwind of events felt almost unreal, and yet, for the first time in years, I was optimistic about what lay ahead. The divorce and the sale of the house unfolded smoothly, just as planned. Mark Johnson from the main office had left me several messages, urging me to relocate to the company's headquarters in New York. This time, I decided to take him up on the offer. Peter Samar also reached out, overwhelmed and wanting to meet for lunch. As I packed up my locker and said goodbye to my colleagues, I spotted yet another photo of Laura and Ethan in the local paper, this time at a politician's barbecue, looking like the perfect couple. I ignored it and focused on preparing for my move. With 3 weeks left, I spent an entire day cataloging the coins I had brought back from New York. Determined to maximize their value, I created eBay listings, prepped shipping materials, and ensured everything was ready for smooth transactions. Payments flowed into my PayPal account and were promptly transferred to my offshore bank. Friday's lunch with Peter Samar turned out to be more eventful than expected. Peter seemed pleased that Ethan was involved in the land trust deal, but expressed disappointment that I hadn't directly benefited. Trying to explain it would have been a headache, so I just let it slide. As we finished, Peter handed me the deeds to 5 acres of land on the outskirts of town. "Good deeds do get rewarded," he said with a smile. Shortly after, my phone buzzed. Emily and Olivia were landing in Nashville in a few hours, having chosen the cheaper airfare over Huntsville. I made the quick drive to pick them up. On the way home, Emily couldn't wait to share a story about a guest lecture at their university. The lecture hall had been packed with over 300 students for an advanced corporate finance course. Midway through, the professor paused to introduce Victoria Langley, who entered with her trademark confidence. She spoke for about 10 minutes before inviting 2 students to lunch at the Western Hotel. To their astonishment, she called Emily and Olivia by name. "So, what did you think of her?" I asked as we drove home. "She's amazing, Dad. How did you even meet her?" Emily blurted out, her voice filled with awe. "She needed a personal assistant, and I seemed like the guy for the job," I joked, earning a playful nudge from Olivia. "Be serious, Dad," she scolded, laughing. "What did you guys talk about at lunch?" I asked, steering the conversation back. "She was curious about our coursework," Olivia said, grinning. "And she had a lot of questions about you." Emily added with a sly look, "We think she's interested in more than just friendship, Dad." "But why you? She could have anyone." Olivia chimed in, "From where we stand, you're a catch. But Victoria Langley doesn't know you like we do." The atmosphere shifted as Emily added, Even Mom didn't seem to know you that well." Her words, though unintentional, hung heavily in the air. I quickly apologized, assuring them, "Your mom's a gem. I shouldn't have said that." "Don't worry, Dad. We understand more than you think," Emily said, her smile reassuring. The ride continued in silence until Olivia's phone buzzed. "Hey, yeah, we got here an hour ago." "No way. Really? That's fantastic. Thanks for letting us know. Talk to you later." Olivia ended the call with a grin and gave Emily a thumbs up. "What's that about?" I asked, curious. Olivia leaned forward. "Guess what, Daddy? Victoria is coming to Huntsville Tuesday morning. She expects you to cover the expenses and serve her breakfast in bed," she teased, laughing. Flattered but a bit apprehensive, I chuckled nervously. The idea of Victoria visiting was exciting, but the pressure from both her and my daughters was hard to ignore. The weekend with Emily and Olivia went smoothly. They spent Saturday afternoon with their mom, though Ethan was noticeably absent. I asked them to keep Victoria's visit a secret from Laura. We sorted through their belongings, deciding what to leave behind at the house. By the time they left, everything was organized. On the drive back to Nashville, they made me promise to get along with Victoria. Emily added with a grin, "Just don't tick her off." Simple enough. I still couldn't understand what Victoria wanted with an old guy who didn't even own a stylish suit. Back home, I relaxed with a beer and the Sunday paper. There were no photos of Laura and Ethan this week, but I noticed a blurb about Keystone Development hitting financial trouble. Winter wheat futures were plummeting, which piqued my interest. I called Ryan Carter and invited him over for a casual lunch and a chat. Over a couple of cold beers, Ryan filled me in on Ethan's checkered past. Ethan had been on a roller coaster of wealth and debt for years, dodging creditors and burning bridges with people who lent him money. His latest project was failing, and his backers were disappearing one by one. It seemed like the perfect storm for Ethan Cooper, and not in a good way. I don't think beer ever tasted so good. Monday morning started on a high note, better than I could have hoped. The coins I'd put up for auction fetched prices far beyond my expectations. The appraiser had valued the lot at around $300,000, and while I wasn't sure they'd hit that mark, they ended up selling for over $200,000 in just 2 weeks. Knowing my financial independence was finally within reach felt liberating. If you told me 3 months ago that I'd feel this way, I'd have laughed it off as a nightmare. But now, I was eagerly looking forward to the new chapter in my life. The house sale was moving smoothly too. The buyers had finalized their financing, and by mid-afternoon, I had a meeting with them. A fat $200,000 check went straight into my offshore account, sealing the deal. They kindly allowed me to stay in the house for another week, which suited both parties perfectly. The next morning, before I could even have my first coffee, my phone buzzed with an unknown caller. The voice on the other end informed me that Ms. Langley would be landing at 10:45 a.m. on Delta Flight 724. I arrived at the airport 30 minutes early, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. To my surprise, paparazzi were already gathered outside the terminal, having caught wind of Victoria's arrival. I tried to keep a low profile, parking in short-term parking, but Victoria's presence made subtlety impossible. Instead of waiting for me to pick her up at the curb, she walked alongside me to the car, ensuring the photographers caught my license plate. The secret was officially out. "I'm sorry for all the fuss," Victoria said as she slid into the passenger seat, unfazed by the attention. I couldn't help but admire her calm amidst the chaos. Driving back, I couldn't shake the memory of seeing her step off the plane. For a brief moment, I'd felt the urge to kiss her. A ridiculous thought for an old guy like me, but it had lingered all the same. The emptiness of the house weighed on me as we arrived. Over the months, I'd gotten rid of almost everything, leaving only the essentials that the new owners would take over once I left. I apologized for the bare state of the place, but Victoria found it amusing. "There's not even a crumb here," she teased. Her solution? A quick trip to Taco Bell for lunch, her choice. I promised her Dreamland ribs for dinner. Her hearty appetite and casual attitude were refreshing. At one point, I asked why she was here. "I figured you'd be back to your usual routine," I said, genuinely curious. She laughed. "This is business-related. I also heard you're moving to New York. I thought I'd offer my spare room for you to stay until you get settled." she said casually. She even mentioned arranging a moving truck for me. When I asked how she found out about my plans, she smiled knowingly. Let's just say I have a knack for paying attention to details. You're in cahoots with my daughters, aren't you? I joked. We spent the afternoon sorting through my belongings, tossing out more than we kept. Victoria had strong opinions about my wardrobe, refusing to let me hold onto certain outdated clothes. Once you're settled in New York, I'm taking you shopping for decent clothes, she declared with a smile. By the time we finished, we'd packed more boxes than would fit in my car, but not quite enough to justify a moving van. I hoped her arrangement included a small truck. Just as we were sitting down for dinner, a delivery van pulled up in front of the house. Are you David Thompson? The driver asked as he stepped out with a clipboard. Yeah. What's this about? I asked, puzzled. It's from Mr. Diego Martinez. Where do you want it? Completely baffled, I pointed to the empty space in the garage where Laura's Volvo used to sit. Minutes later, I found myself staring at a sleek orange Lamborghini Gallardo Spider Superleggera. What the hell is this? I asked, completely stunned. The driver grinned. A 2008 Lamborghini Gallardo Spider Superleggera. Ain't she a beauty? Victoria was barely containing her laughter as I signed off on the delivery. I don't even know what to do with this thing, I muttered, shaking my head. Still laughing, Victoria followed me back inside. Over a full rack of ribs and a couple of beers, I asked, care to explain the deal with the car? Diego, big on winter wheat, she began. Everyone thought he was crazy as prices started to tank, but he doubled down on contracts. In less than a week, he cleared over $40 million. Good for him, I said, impressed. Yeah, but what pleased him more than the cash were the compliments about his move. I guess this was his way of sharing the wealth, she added with a wink. Well, I said, raising my beer, good for Diego. The evening ended on a light note, with Victoria's laughter still echoing in my ears. Though I had no idea what to do with the Lamborghini, I couldn't deny that life was becoming increasingly unpredictable. And oddly enough, I was starting to enjoy it. Hope Diego didn't drop my name, I remarked as we sat at the table, ribs steaming in front of us. Victoria grinned, her eyes sparkling with amusement. He wanted to. He thought you deserved credit, but he asked me first. He was serious about wanting your address. I had no idea he planned to send you that car, though. I shook my head in disbelief. That man is something else. As we ate, I watched Victoria drizzle Tabasco sauce liberally over her ribs, unbothered by the mess or the heat. She handled them with the kind of confidence that made her even more captivating. I couldn't help but laugh. You know, I'll be sending that car back tomorrow, right? That's what I figured, she said with a shrug. Don't worry. Diego won't be offended. He wanted to send money, but he knew you'd refuse, so this was his way of trying to make you feel obligated to keep it. We laughed as we ordered extra beers to counteract the fire from all her Tabasco. I couldn't remember the last time I felt so comfortable around someone. For the first time in years, I didn't want the night to end. Sitting across from her, I felt an almost youthful envy for the kind of men who could charm their way into a woman's life so effortlessly. I wasn't one of those men, but in that moment, I wished I were. Eventually, the night had to wind down. When we returned home, though, things took an unexpected turn. Victoria grabbed my hand and led me to the bedroom. For a man who'd spent most of his life putting others' needs first, that night was a revelation. She had a way of making me feel seen, appreciated, and, for once, alive. The next morning, I tried my best with breakfast in bed, juice, coffee, and a Danish. Sorry, it's not much, I apologized. It's perfect, she said with a smile, though the awkward balancing act of eating on a tray had us both laughing. Eventually, we relocated to the kitchen, still teasing each other. Victoria, I've got to ask, why me? I finally blurted out. You could have anyone. What are you doing here with me? She didn't hesitate. David, I've been burned by slick, charming men before. You're different. You don't try to impress me with flash or words you don't mean. You're genuine, and that matters more than anything. So, you're into me because I'm not a player or an idiot? I joked. She laughed softly. That's one way to put it, she said. But I was also impressed with how you handled Robert in New York. I shrugged, playing it down. I just sold some coins. Nothing major. It wasn't the sale. It was the plan to buy the land for the trust. That showed me something about your character. Me? A philanthropist? Hardly, I replied, smirking. I just wanted to mess with my wife's lover. She burst out laughing, and I couldn't help but join her. Victoria had a way of making me feel at ease, even when we were joking about the messier parts of my past. That's what I appreciated most about her. Beneath the polished surface was someone who understood life's imperfections and still found joy in them. Her flight back to New York was early, and saying goodbye was harder than I expected. Before she left, she handed me a key to her apartment. "You'll need this when you get to the city," she said casually, as though it wasn't a big deal. But it was a big deal, to me at least. The Lamborghini stayed in my garage another day until the dealer came to pick it up. It was a relief to see it go. As impressive as it was, it didn't fit into my life. I wasn't a sports car guy, and I doubted I'd ever be. Later that afternoon, Ryan Carter called with troubling news about Keystone Development. Ethan Cooper had lost most of his backers overnight, and rumors of missing funds were starting to swirl. It wasn't surprising, but it added a new layer of drama to an already complicated situation. As if on cue, Laura showed up unannounced. "What brings you here?" I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. "I need to talk," she said hesitantly. "I'm leaving in a few days, but I wanted to settle some things first." Her eyes wandered to the garage. "What's that?" she asked, noticing the empty space where her Volvo used to sit and the bright orange sports car parked beside it. "Sold the Volvo back to the dealer," I replied. "You said you didn't want it." "The orange car was a gift, but it's being picked up tomorrow." Laura looked at me with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. "Gift from who? Victoria?" "No," I said firmly. "A gesture of gratitude from someone I helped." She seemed to accept the answer but lingered on the topic of money. "What about the house sale? Did you keep anything?" "It's all gone," I said simply. "You didn't want anything, so I used it to set up my new place in New York." She nodded, though her expression was hard to read. "New York," she said softly, almost to herself. "That's a big change." "It's a new job. A significant raise," I added, omitting any mention of Victoria or my Cayman account. Some things didn't need to be shared. The ride to the Holiday Inn was uneventful until Laura broke the silence. "Tell me about her," she said suddenly. "She's not exactly a girlfriend," I replied. "More like a business partner." "What kind of business?" she pressed. "No business, really. I'm just a grocery clerk, remember?" I said, my tone light but pointed. Laura muttered something under her breath, but I let it slide. Dropping her off, I felt a pang of guilt watching her walk away without a goodbye, but it passed quickly. She'd made her choices, and now I was making mine. Thursday morning brought the final divorce papers, arriving earlier than expected. I wasn't complaining. That same day, the Huntsville paper featured a photo of Victoria arriving at the airport with me in the background. I wondered if Laura had seen it, knowing every room at the Holiday Inn received a complimentary newspaper. After breakfast, I emptied my safety deposit box, ready to move forward. The coins from the eBay auctions were mostly sold, and I spent the rest of the day preparing packages for shipment. By Friday, I planned to have everything mailed out, with payments flowing into my Cayman account. The rest of my belongings were loaded onto a small moving truck, and the house buyers arrived to finalize everything. It was a clean break. The drive to New York was long, 12 hours without delays. But the thought of Victoria waiting with a homemade dinner kept me going. I wasn't sure if she'd cook herself or order in, but it didn't matter. Knowing she cared enough to welcome me made all the difference. As I crossed into Virginia, my phone buzzed. Emily's voice was urgent. "Dad, you won't believe this. Ethan skipped town. Mom's stranded at the Holiday Inn. No car, no place to stay." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. As much as I wanted to say, "I told you so," I couldn't. Despite everything, I didn't want Laura to suffer. But this was her mess to figure out, not mine.